Young Turks now has audio, the TYT Audio Network, podcasts of some of your favorite shows and new shows, including one with Nina Turner, former Ohio State Senator. She's going to do We the People with Nina Turner, talking about equality and justice and seeing that through the eyes of regular Americans who are affected by politics and policy. Everybody check it out at tyt.com/audio.
Recently, Speaker Paul Ryan was asked whether or not he is supportive of Donald Trump's zero tolerance policy in regard to immigration. And that policy means prosecuting anyone who attempts to cross the border and taking their children away as the parents face prosecution. Well, Ryan says that he disagrees with this policy, but he blames it on something other than the Trump administration. Take a look.
Are you comfortable with the current zero tolerance policy leading to parents and children being separated at the border?
No, I'm not. This is because of a court ruling. And so this, I do think, ought to be addressed. We believe it should be addressed in immigration legislation. So what's happening at the border and the separation of parents and their children is because of a court ruling. That's why I think legislation is necessary. The last thing we want to do is have some kind of an exercise in futility where we have like a discharge petition that brings something that will never make it into law. So we're bringing legislation that's been carefully crafted and negotiated to the floor. We won't guarantee passage. I don't know the answer to that. Remember when I took this job 3 years ago, I said, we'll bring stuff to the floor that may or may not pass. That's how Congress works sometimes.
Okay, so he blamed a court ruling for what's happening. The only court ruling that's taken place so far in regard to Trump's policy was a federal judge's ruling from San Diego that indicated an ACLU lawsuit against this policy can move forward because there are constitutional violations. That is the only time a court has weighed in on this particular case. Now, there was also some fact-checking done, so I want to share that with you. Let's go to graphic 44. The Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy is responsible for spurring family separations. Court rulings do not mandate that course. Until the policy was announced in April, such families were usually referred for civil deportation proceedings not requiring separation. Also, court rulings establish the right of migrant children to be released from custody. They do not establish that right for parents, so the discrepancy can be used to keep adults behind bars while their children are not. So it's not a court ruling. I gave you the context or the examples of when the courts have weighed in on similar issues. They are lying. They don't want to take responsibility for something that they have done. And the fact that Paul Ryan, that's spineless, won't stand up to Trump and then has the audacity to blame the courts for what's happening right now is just disgusting.
So believe it or not, it gets a little worse, or maybe a lot worse. So he talked about legislation. Well, that sounds good. Hey, we want to fix this. He says he's against taking the children away from the parents. That sounds good. And then later he went on to talk about the Dreamers and how he wanted to pass legislation about the Dreamers. That also sounds good. And a lot of the press give Paul Ryan a lot of credit because he can speak English, unlike the president. So it's easy to call out Trump's blatant, over-the-top lies. Now, credit to the Associated Press that did a good fact check on Paul Ryan here, but let me go further. So there's another court ruling called Flores from 1997. And Paul Ryan is partly pretending that is what's causing the mess here instead of Donald Trump's edict and policy. That's not true. In fact, what Flores does is the opposite. It sets minimum requirements for how to treat kids in this case. What Paul Ryan put into that legislation is to get rid of the minimum requirements.
Right.
He's such a bad guy. And then he comes out there and pretends to be a good guy and he says things like, oh, we carefully crafted this. So how about the Dreamer one? Well, if he actually wants to pass legislation protecting the Dreamers, well, all the Democrats would sign on. It would pass easily. He's the Speaker of the House. He could introduce it. Well, we should be done with this by noon tomorrow, right? No, they put into the legislation getting even tougher on immigrants.
Yeah.
So all the Democrats are going to vote no because it's actually a Trojan horse to actually be more vicious. They're unbelievable.
And the way that they're going to play this is they're going to make it seem as though the legislation the GOP comes up with is going to be wonderful and it's going to help out the Dreamers and it's going to protect immigrants, when in reality it's not. Democrats are going to vote against it because of what Republicans want to do with the Flores settlement, which again, let's go to graphic 49. It calls for the legislation that Republicans are pushing for. It calls for clarification of the Flores settlement, a 1997 ruling that establishes minimum standards for detention of minors. When they call for clarification, essentially what they want to do is get rid of it. And if you want further proof of that, the White House has called for an end to the Flores settlement, as well as other laws and rulings that prevent indefinite detention of immigrants.
So it's a Trojan horse to detain them indefinitely. And you know what they're going to say when Democrats vote no, because what's actually in the legislation is terrible. They're going to say, we were trying to protect the kids, but the Democrats wouldn't let us. Worst people on earth. If they were actually protecting the dreamers and making sure they kept the families together, I'd love it. We'd say, yeah, that's fantastic. And we'd kill the Democrats for not signing on to it. What are you, playing politics with these kids' lives, right? Anybody who watches this show, we're not shy about hitting Democrats and hitting them over and over and over again, right? But in this case, they're right. The thing that Paul Ryan, the law that he's pushing for, makes the situation more draconian, not less. And it's all a political trick so they can say, oh, we tried to fix it, but the Democrats voted no. Aren't we cute? Well, it's the job of the press to point out they are not cute. Tell the people what the reality is, what the truth is. Those pieces of legislation are terrible and worse for immigrants than even the current standards. 2 easy ways to follow the Young Turks. One is hit the subscribe button down below, then you're a TYT subscriber. And second is ring the bell. And when you do that on YouTube, you're notified of our videos.